Let's get started. Thanks everyone for joining us. I am Lucas Mendes. I am founder and CEO of Revelo. And today we're here to talk about engineering team metrics. What are the metrics that actually matter in 2025? So traditional metrics like velocity, DORA stats, DX benchmarks, they've been evolving, of course, and now more than ever, they're being reshaped by market forces, AI, all that good stuff. And during this webinar, it's going to be a 45-minute discussion. We are going to hear from Ryan, Pedro, and Julian about which KPIs they think actually drive success, how AI is changing productivity tracking, how to balance speed, quality, and team well-being without burnout, of course. So without any further ado, let me intro our panelists. So we've got Pedro Tabio, who is the co-founder and CTO at Vibrant. We've got Julian Ramirez, who is Senior Engineering Manager at Dropbox, and Ryan Cooley, Director of Engineering at ProcessMaker. I am going to start with a question that I hope the three of you can answer. And if you can, just start with a short intro. Tell us a little bit about your background, so that everyone can have context. Meanwhile, if anyone has questions during the webinar, you can use the QA function in Zoom, and we'll get to them after the panel. So let's talk about DORA metrics, guys. Are these metrics still useful? And maybe Ryan, I'll pick on you to start.
All right, thank you very much. First of all, thank you for having me, and good to see you and good to see everyone on the call. My name is Ryan Cooley. As you mentioned, I am the Director of Engineering at ProcessMaker. Started as an individual contributor there and worked my way up to Director of Engineering, where I oversee about 30 people and about 5 separate teams. So in answer to your question, are DORA metrics still useful? I think that they are still valuable, and they can definitely be strong indicators of course, engineering performance specifically. For us at ProcessMaker, they all feed into something which is even more important from the bigger picture, which is time to value. Once we close a deal with a customer, how quickly are we able to actually deliver meaningful value to that customer? And of course, that requires more than just engineering efficiency, right? That's a cross-functional effort between all of our teams: sales, customer success, support, cloud apps. Everyone plays a role in making sure that deployments translate into actual impact. So we do track things like deployment frequency, lead time, but we view those through the lens of how they actually help us accelerate a customer's success, not just how fast we ship code. So like, just to give you an example, let's say a customer signs a deal, our engineering team delivers the promised feature on time. That's great. But then we realize that adoption is slow because maybe the setup process is too complex, and customer success is now struggling with onboarding that customer. Support is getting flooded with questions. Sales is frustrated. So from an engineering perspective, we hit our goal and we built and shipped the feature, but from a bigger picture business perspective, we did not deliver value fast enough. And if we took a more holistic view and we worked as engineering leaders, worked with product and CS and support early on, then we might have prioritized usability. And that's why I think as engineering leaders, it's up to us to think beyond just these DORA metrics and just delivery metrics, because it's not just about how fast we ship, it's about how fast customers see real benefits. So I think as engineering leaders, it's crucial that we take that bigger picture view and then translate that to our engineers.
Great, thanks for that point of view. I'm going to ask Julian the same question because I know you have a different context, right, Julian? Your experience is in mobile, so I'd love to have your take on it. And please start with a quick intro so that the audience can learn a little bit more about you.
Yeah, sure thing. Thank you. Julian Ramirez is Senior Engineering Manager over at Dropbox, been there about 5 years. And for much of my career, I've been focusing in mobile specifically and building and shipping mobile products to customers. And I think DORA is valuable, but I think with a lot of metrics, you kind of sometimes need to tweak them in order to get it to be relevant for your team rather than sticking to a strict dogmatic definition for it. And mobile is often a case of like, yes, we like directionally what this is about, but we need to customize it a little bit. Mostly because mobile apps still have a review cycle with the Google and the Apple app stores. And we can't ship multiple updates every day like you can on the web. And like for better and for worse, but mostly I think we know which direction that goes in. And so the problem with throughput is that like, we're pretty much like at Dropbox, we do a public release every other week. And I think that's generally like a pretty standard cadence, which means like we're not doing great, usually compared to web, which is doing multiple times a day. But I think that it's still valuable for us to be looking. We have internal builds that happen multiple times, and also just adapting it to be from, when you create the PR to when it gets merged is sometimes, or like when it, goes through all of our internal checks and all of stuff like that. I think that we spend a lot of time trying to make sure that our developer pipelines are operating quickly and efficiently and ensuring quality of the results there. But kind of while we do have to customize and have some caveats for throughput, stability is absolutely critical for us because we are shipping boxed software essentially. And the nightmare that every mobile developer team has is like a crash on launch type situation, because that's such a terrible customer experience and it requires such an intensive way to fix it, of like shipping the fix and having customers downloading it again, knowing that they're having a terrible time like in between then. And so the DORA metrics really do kind of make sure that we are able to keep an eye on, the stability side of things and prioritizing and indexing very highly on that.
Thanks for that point of view. It's really, I love how you put it. It's like when you're shipping box software, everything changes.
Yeah.
In addition to what you mentioned about the App Store throttling in a way, right? Moving over to Pedro. Pedro, you actually had an interesting take on this as to how it might evolve with the advent of AI agents.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, thanks for having us, Lucas, on the Revelo team. My name is Pedro. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Vibrant. And at Vibrant, we're actually building our cursor for doctors. So it's, it's not applicable to the software engineering population, but we're augmenting doctors with AI agents in different ways. But overall, it's all about productivity, right? And yes, I've held. This is an early stage startup. The engineering team is 3 people. We don't track as many DORA metrics these days right now, but I used to. In my last team, I was head of engineering at Stride Health. I had a 50-person organization, multiple teams, and we were always looking at those and how they really resonate with your point, Ryan, on time to value and good teams win, right? So yeah, in my case, I think I would like to really start pushing the thinking about DORA, right? And how it's still applicable in my opinion, right? It's still relevant, but there's 2 aspects, right? The first aspect is the bar is now higher for humans, right? These humans are augmented with AI, so maybe DORA metrics that were seeing great for humans in 2022, 2021. They're okay now. They might just be okay now, and in 2 years they might be terrible. Right? And also just going one step beyond, and we apply DORA to AI agents, right? How, like, as they are coming up this automation layer, right? Like getting more sophisticated, more autonomous. Should we apply DORA metrics to teams of AI agents, right? And even like going one step beyond, like, should we start measuring DORA as a benchmark for coding agents, right? Kind of like, there's these benchmarks like SW Bench and others, right? That models are like, yeah, when Anthropic or OpenAI launch a model, they're like, hey, this crushes SWE Bench. But what if we take DORA and take it as a benchmark? Hey, our agents have great DORA metric, like great cycle times, and even like other downstream metrics from that. Great speed to review, lack of bugs, all of that, right, in real case scenarios. So I feel like it's something that's still an open question for me, but something that's really interesting to me.
Okay. Thank you. So I'll stick with you, Pedro, for a bit. And I know some companies still track lines of code, PR count, raw velocity metrics. What are the risks of relying on those, in your opinion?
I mean, yeah, there's, I mean, of course, these metrics are classic examples of in isolation, them in isolation being meaningless, right? Again, resonating with Ryan's point on the like looking at metrics in the context of the entire company and the entire organization. And I think, I mean, right now, if you just maximize on lines of code, then you're going to be golden, right? A team that's like that evaluated on lines of code can just run AI agents on Cursor and generate 10,000 lines in 5 minutes, really. And if your teams get measured by that, I mean, maybe it's not your problem. Maybe it's your leader's problem that they need to change these metrics, but they're meaningless in this day and age, right? And I think even DORA in isolation is meaningless without. I mean, you can game anything that's a metric in isolation, and you can just optimize for meeting that metric and not care about anything else. So you can say like, okay, we have cycle times in 5 minutes, right? But then you don't do any review. You don't have velocity. You just have speed, right? You don't know where you're going. So yeah, I mean, it's main point that I'm trying to get across is they're meaningless in isolation.
Right. Julian, how about in a team that is larger and more stable as the teams that you guys have at Dropbox? How do you think about velocity and what are the risks that you see in those metrics?
Yeah. Like I love velocity personally. Like I think it's really helpful for a team when they're trying to, because like it can serve as a gut check. Like it's a helpful milestone, but like Pedro was saying, in isolation, it's a dangerous thing. Or also like when misapplied, it becomes incredibly dangerous. And I think that velocity is really fun when it's able to be like team velocity and like it is not used as like a performance substitute. Like I think those are entirely different things. And so as long as the team is able to trust its leaders and the process, then like estimating stories is fine. Like, and having an understanding that like you're going to have an average number of stories that you complete and a velocity, like, that is all very reasonable and practical and helpful when you're trying to get like higher fidelity estimates for what the team is going to be able to deliver. But if you try and say that every engineer should do 3 points per week or whatever, or that like a senior engineer should do twice as many points as like, a junior engineer, that's, the road of gamesmanship. And especially with AI now, you're going to end up with a lot of funky stuff. So I think it's just important to try and keep in mind, like, what are the actual results that you're trying to get out of this? And like, how is the data going to change how you're operating and running the business? Also, like, I think a great thing about velocity sometimes is that it can indicate slowdowns either upstream or downstream as well. Like, depending on when you count the story as like done, finished, and delivered, that will include what your, delivery pipeline looks like. And it can be helpful if you're kind of like, we have a lot of stories that are lingering around kind of like not yet finished because we're waiting for the runs to finish. Or it can be that like we wildly underestimated these stories because like we didn't have high enough fidelity designs or we didn't spend enough time talking about the project. And only like once we started work on it after we estimated it, like things explode. And so I think those are helpful ways of sparking the conversation to get the team to reflect on what's going on.
Great, thanks. And Ryan, I really love the time to value lens that you can use. Do velocity metrics have a place while you're thinking about those lenses?
Yes, and I think I'm very much in line with what's been said already, in the sense that Julian mentioned that it's velocity is probably a better team metric than an individual metric, right? And Pedro mentioned, like, any of these metrics can be gamed very easily, especially on an individual level. So I think really it's better to look at it as a team metric. But for me, just to give you an example, we did our very first kind of like an engineering award ceremony today for our engineers. Happened to do it today. And in order to prepare for that, we had to look at metrics and figure out, okay, how do we determine who gets these awards, right? And one of the key discussions that we had amongst our leadership is making sure that we are rewarding the right things, the behaviors that really drive impact, not just the things that are easiest to measure. I think probably one of the reasons that velocity is so often looked at is because it's one of those things that's pretty easy to measure. Whereas things that are maybe a little less tangible or take more calculation are more difficult to measure. And so we don't spend as much time putting those things together. So those things are visible and quantifiable, but if we reward engineers for shipping the most lines of code, then we're probably encouraging inefficiency, we're encouraging gaming the system, and instead we want to recognize work that, as you said, and as I mentioned earlier, it maximizes our time to value.
And interesting that you're mentioning things that are more difficult to measure. And I think that collaboration is difficult to measure. And problem solving in an AI augmented team is difficult to measure. How do you think about those?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting challenge, especially with AI, because it kind of changes the way that we have to think about productivity, right? If you're just looking at individual output, it's really easy to miss the bigger picture, because you have AI handling so much of that grunt work, that the real value now comes from how engineers collaborate with each other and how they problem solve. So for us, it's less about who wrote the most code and more about who helped drive the best outcomes. And frankly, that's like always been my approach to metrics, is I would rather focus on the outcomes than on the inputs. And so going back to the awards that we handed out today, we asked our engineers to like nominate people based on how well they collaborate with each other. And so it becomes a more subjective metric, of course, in that sense. But it's something that is a really good marker for us. And it's something that AI doesn't really do yet, at least not yet. So measuring these things becomes, I think, a much more intuitive process than just looking at hard numbers.
Julian, want to share your views on that? Collaboration, problem solving?
Yeah, it's interesting, especially as we're trying to, I think like engineers, like engineering leaders are really trying to encourage engineering teams to pick up these tools. And with a lot of the earlier tales of like, AI is coming for everyone's job, I think there was a reluctance that can happen with some individuals of like not wanting to adopt AI out of like a fear of kind of like using the enemy, or even feeling like, something I recently heard some engineers talking about was that like it feels like cheating almost, like if the AI writes the code for you. But I think it's definitely right of like looking at a lot of these metrics at the team level, and not so much, like don't live by the sword, die by the sword of like individual metrics necessarily, and realizing that, like, oftentimes these AI tools are better viewed as team members and partners in helping you collaborate, either brainstorming, writing the code, writing the tests, doing whatever, and knowing that that is all adding up together to result in the customer value as well.
Yeah, I completely understand the feeling that it feels like cheating, but in a way, I think what Pedro mentioned before was that the bar just got higher, right? So that's something you have to start thinking about. Pedro, I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Yeah, I guess like one of the findings, I mean, again, we are a pretty small team, right? But one of the surprising findings that I've had is that probably with these AI agents and the cursors, the Windsors of the world, it really is the golden age of asynchronous communication and documentation. The thing that we found that's the most effective it's not so much as like, sure, I mean, there's still value on like a couple engineers hopping on. And in our case, we're a fully remote team, so hopping on these tools like Tuple, for example, for code pairing and others, right? They're great, but at the end of the day, what really moves the needle is great documentation in line in the code base, right? Because you can use Cursor as your code base tutor in some ways. If you properly document and you use the code base as the source of this detailed asynchronous documentation, your collaboration can also be with these AI agents. And you can learn about the structure of the code by just asking at code base on Cursor and on Windsurf. I haven't tried Windsurf as much, but I'm sure there's an equivalent. And I think collaboration in many ways is changing to me from like purely sync, purely pair programming to more asynchronous documentation heavy approach.
And just a quick follow up for you, Pedro. Do you guys use any AI driven metrics in your org today or not?
I mean, we're not tracking any AI driven metrics at this point, right? Again, we're a small team, but yeah, in terms of qualitatively, yes, we are, right? We sit down as a team, right? Every couple of weeks, we have the concept of guilds, which I took from Stride and other organizations use, basically, which are meetups to talk about the craft of software engineering. And it gives a qualitative pulse of how we're liking our tooling, how we're liking our developer experience. And qualitatively, we love it. We love it. And all of these ideas, all of these approaches that we're following are coming from there.
Plus, real quick, like +1 for Pedro's comment about the value of documentation being leveraged with the AI tools. We are learning a lot that especially, we have a very large code base and we have teams that sometimes need to do work in other teams' areas of responsibility. And it can be really intimidating when you need to go over to like a foreign part of the code base, essentially, and trying to figure out like, how do I do things here? And engineers have been saving a lot of time by being able to ask questions with, different AI tools. And I think that is, especially for large organizations, or people new to an organization as well, I think that's going to be a gigantic boost for teams that adopt it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And in our last webinar, I think that was something that we discussed as well. It's one of the early use cases and one of the highest adoption ones. And Ryan, by the way, during that conversation, you were part of that. You mentioned when we were discussing ROI and metrics, you talked a little bit about AI adoption, right? Is that a metric that you are still tracking?
Yeah, definitely. And I would say we're kind of looking at two key things there. One is AI adoption, like you mentioned. How many of our engineers are actually using these tools that we're offering, Cursor, Copilot? We haven't used Windsurf as much, but that's something that we're also looking into. But on top of that, how do they like it? Which again is another one of these subjective measures that's really hard to track. But I think it's really important to do regular pulse checks with our team to see if they like the tools that they're using, especially on the AI front. Number two is an AI metric that we measure, which is completion acceptance rate. And this is one of those things that Cursor provides. I would imagine Windsurf provides it as well. Copilot, I believe, provides it. How often is the code that's being suggested by these tools actually being used? To be honest, I don't have a great feel for that yet. We haven't integrated these into our metrics reporting in any really substantial way, but it's something that we're keeping an eye on because I think that's going to be like the canary in the coal mine about how well these tools are actually performing in the real world, especially in the months and the years to come.
Yeah, I gotta add something, which is, but those acceptance rates can also be gamed, right? And there's the real issue of vibe coding. Like it's very en vogue lately. The concept of vibe coding, just mindlessly hitting accept all, and just letting it rip, So that's something that again, in our discussions as an engineering team, we're keeping an eye on.
we've definitely had to be like, please use the AI tools, but you are responsible for what it writes at the end of the day. And if we find that it's a lot of garbage, we're going to have words.
Yeah, I mean, the garbage, AI generated garbage can present itself in many forms. I think that garbage is one of them. But one thing we're seeing is that some tools offer AI generated insights on productivity, right? And I think my question to you guys is if you guys trust those insights, and maybe it's yes, maybe it's no, maybe it's not yet. But we'll love to hear your views. Julian, go ahead.
I think this is one of those times where like mobile slaps like the not yet button, or like we're a corner case of a corner case. And unfortunately, a lot of the AI tools like Windsurf and Cursor are awkward to work with, because I would say like 95% of mobile engineers are using like the primary IDEs of like Xcode or Android Studio. And there is like kind of Copilot integration with this, but it's all right. And of course, Google and Apple also have their own things, but none of those tools yet offer really kind of developer productive insights.
How about for web, Ryan?
Yeah, I'm also in the not yet bucket. I would say that AI insights can be interesting. I don't fully trust them yet, and certainly not as a primary decision-making tool, because AI can surface patterns, but I think the larger challenge with AI in a lot of contexts is, no pun intended, that it lacks context, right? It doesn't understand why a slowdown might have happened. Maybe it was a tech debt cleanup, maybe it was a major refactor, maybe it was an engineer taking well-deserved PTO. And so it doesn't have all of the business context. So we really still have to rely on human judgment in that regard. And AI metrics can serve as the beginning of the conversation, but they would never be the conclusion of the conversation for me.
Right. So you mean AI hasn't made any of your traditional KPIs obsolete in any way, right?
I wouldn't say so. Yeah, I would say that our KPIs are still very traditional in that sense.
Okay. How about you, Pedro? Sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, in terms of productivity insight from AI, right now again, we're mostly qualitative at this point. All of the general metrics still applies, as I mentioned, and I definitely look forward to platforms, right, that can integrate, get more context about the organization, get more context about the company, and run insights with that data richness, right? So yeah, there are companies that specialize in DORA metrics, and what they do is they basically sync with your GitHub, sync with a few other things, and they give you dashboards and so on. I haven't seen a lot of progress in terms of like, hey, let's create an AI agent to find patterns or to find trends in teams. But I'm sure they're working on it. And I think, I mean, again, I think it's going to be a user experience thing. It's going to be it's going to make some insights more readily available to teams, and surface like separate signal from noise in better ways than just classical software and classical dashboards would do. So I think it's part of the evolution of all software that's becoming more AI aware that we're going to see in the next few years. I haven't seen any like AI native productivity insights platform yet. So maybe that's a startup idea right there.
I think I am starting to see some craft reporting tools that are kind of like you were talking about, Pedro, of like, you can link GitHub to it, and it can basically do like sometimes git bisect, and sometimes even just like, we think this line is causing this crash. And that's sometimes been right. And it's awesome when it is. And then there are definitely like, some anomaly detection tools starting to come out there, but I haven't yet seen any that are like reliably delivering insight.
Me either. Yeah, we use Sentry, for example, and it does have some of those insights. It doesn't really work great.
It's more like really fun when it finds it. You're like, oh,
Yeah.
cool. But it's not
Yeah.
yet like relying on it too.
Yeah.
Why don't you shift gears here a little bit, guys, and talk about trade-offs? So we've been talking about productivity, accuracy, bugs. I want to hear your opinion on trade-offs, right? So trade-offs between speed, quality, and developer happiness, right? So I think that's a sensitive point, and would love to hear how that plays out in different settings, like the three very different engineering teams that you guys lead. Pedro, you've got focuses on you right now, so let's keep you on the tap.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to start by saying that to me, I'd rather spend more money and more resources on developer happiness and developer experience than on just having a larger team. Really, like, I feel like a small team, small, tight-knit team of great engineers with the best of the best developer tooling is going to move 10x faster than a 50% larger team with worse tooling, right? I think it's you should never negotiate on developer experience, and honestly, like, Vibrant would not exist without the latest and greatest in developer experience. We have a stack that's really simple to use that allows us to move really fast with a really tiny team. And if you do the math, it costs us less than half of an engineer's yearly salary, right? So it really, I feel like you should never negotiate on that, and especially startups that they try to nickel and dime and they're like, hey, yeah, let's start with AWS because it's cheap, right? So you're gonna be host if you start down that path, because other startups, they have smaller teams, they have fewer communication interfaces between the team, but they move way faster because they're relying on the latest and greatest. And I mean, AWS is great, but not so great for fast moving small startups that need to be nimble. So, yeah.
Ryan, I'm particularly interested in hearing your opinion on this because of how long you've been at ProcessMaker, and I'm sure that how you think about that trade-off has evolved over time. So I'd love to hear that story.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Pedro. Like, I think that I would also rather spend more money and resources on developer happiness than on a larger team. We're in the middle of our quarterly planning right now, actually, and one of the conversations that we had with our team leads today is just about making sure not to overcomplicate our estimates by trying to split them amongst too many people, right? Like, if one engineer can work on a feature and really own it, then that might be better than splitting it amongst 3 or 4 different engineers, because that just adds a lot of complication. So I fully agree with you, Pedro, on that. In terms of trade-offs between like speed, quality, happiness, I would say that they are all really intertwined. Of course, you have to find the right balance. But just to give you an example, and as you mentioned, I've been at ProcessMaker for 6 years, and frankly, we kind of went through this dark era a couple of years ago where we were just kind of spinning our wheels as an engineering team and as a product organization as a whole. And we were really unable to ship consistently. We weren't delivering value very quickly, and we were kind of stuck in bug hell for a very long time. And there were a lot of reasons for that, not just the engineering org, internal, external reasons for that. But thankfully, and thanks to our leadership, we eventually kind of got out of that rut. But the thing is, like, during that time, I don't think any of us were very happy, right? I wasn't happy. My team wasn't very happy, just because maybe we were a little bit less stressed and we weren't feeling as much pressure to deliver with speed. That didn't mean that we were happy, because engineers at the end of the day, they want to engineer. They want to build things. They want to build cool stuff. And if they can't do that, they're not going to be happy, and you're going to start seeing churn. Thankfully, almost all of our team stuck with us through that time, and we have certainly come through the other end of that. But I think that despite the added stress of having like increased expectations upon us now, we're probably all a lot more happier and a lot more fulfilled.
Julian, is mobile a corner case when it comes to this trade-off as well?
Maybe just in that we have to buy a lot more devices. Like, I think any mobile engineer who's been doing it for a couple of years probably has a healthy stable of test devices. And definitely, like I think, usually developer happiness is shockingly cheap in the grand scheme of things. The quintessential example just being like laptop, or like get them a computer that can build quickly and a hard drive that can store all of the builds, so they aren't like micromanaging hard drive space. That's something that's just trivial for a company to send new laptops with big enough hard drives to fix, and something that we definitely work on here. I think like like at Dropbox, it's, we have it's not quite unique, but it's a rare opportunity of having the privilege of being bitten by some of the times when we've sacrificed quality. And then, you end up with a piece of the code base that is not really pleasant to work in, or really dangerous and pernicious. It might just be because it's really old code and you haven't touched it in a long time. But I think trying to keep quality high is something that we've, had the privilege of being reminded several times about, like, this is why we value that. And so I think now we have really been trying to invest in quality initiatives to make a lot of the code base like up to date. And, like for the mobile apps, when they were originally written, they were written in entirely different languages. And, like it was Objective-C instead of Swift, or Java instead of Kotlin. And a lot of the features that we implemented around were like kind of we were one of the first companies to implement these things of like mobile subscriptions. And so it's really important to be able to allocate the time to go back and improve the quality of a lot of these things. And of course, there's always going to be more code than we're able to like really rewrite and bring up to modern standards. But something that like, we're also going through quarter planning right now. So happy quarter planning season to all who celebrate. And we're trying to really make sure that when we are allocating team bandwidth, that we are allocating it both for product-led initiatives and engineering-led initiatives, and having very explicit kind of checks of like, what are our bets on the engineering side that we want to make that are going to improve code quality or improve developer happiness. And if a team doesn't have that on there, then making sure we have that explicit conversation about it. But also, like, I try and remain pragmatic, and like not like, while I wish that every piece of code we write is written to the gold standard, but inevitably every code base, like sometimes there is a feature that is not like critical. Like maybe it's critical that it exists, but it doesn't need to be super high. It's not something that many of the customers are going to be interacting with. And so maybe there it is, just like, just get it good enough and then we're moving on. But really limiting those kinds of trade-offs, because it can be, I think speed in development is just like speed the drug, and like it can be addicting. And so you have to be really careful about, not falling for the siren song of like shipping features faster by compromising on quality.
And this is actually a very good segue to the next trade-off, because before the webinar, I asked the three of you guys individually, which is more important, shipping fast or shipping well? And actually got three different responses. This is actually a very interesting one. And I think you just answered a resounding shipping well there. But yeah, let's hear from the other two. Ryan.
Yeah, and certainly not to contradict anybody, but if you have to force me to pick one, I would say speed. Because of that experience that I had going through those dark ages, I would say that speed can be the silver bullet, because the faster you're able to ship and get changes into production, the happier and more fulfilled your engineers are going to be. And the faster, of course, you can hear feedback from customers, deal with any issues that you might have unfortunately introduced in that effort to move quickly. Now, that is not to say that we shouldn't be careful, right? Like we should absolutely plan things well as part of all of our quarterly plannings that we're going through right now. We measure twice and we cut once. But I think speed also helps you to think differently about quality, right? Because if you think with speed at the forefront, you're going to do things to make sure that you can still deliver with both speed and quality. You'll implement more thorough automated testing. You'll have more careful deployment strategies, and you'll implement really good quality controls. So, like I said, I don't love having to pick one, but if I had to pick one, I would pick speed for that reason.
Pedro.
Yeah, and to me, I do resonate with Ryan, and I think to me, like, there's like a sort of like a cascading effect as well, right? Like, great infrastructure, great developer tooling yields great speed, the ability to be moving at great speed, and the ability to move at great speed yields quality in itself, right? I mean, and maybe we're all a product of our circumstances. And right now, I'm at a very early stage startup that needs to move fast to survive, right? But I see it in our customers, right? And it's important to have this lens that customers would rather get things done on time, and the fact that there might be a bug, but you can fix it in an hour, than you taking a month more and then not seeing any bugs, but then complaining that you didn't get that in their hands in a month, right? In our case, that's true. I mean, there's other industries, there's other circumstances, right? But in our case, as long as, of course, I mean, we're in a regulated industry, and we need to get the right safeguards in place. But I totally resonate with that speed begetting quality and actually like outcomes, right? Our customers are happier if we deliver on time, but there's something that not quite working like they wanted, and we push a fix in an hour, right? I know it's not possible on mobile, and we also have mobile apps. We're using a different stack that's React Native based, so it's a little different. But yeah, that's they are thrilled when we are able to fix the bug that's been nagging them, and they were expecting, oh, maybe you'll fix it next week. In an hour, it's fixed, and that's because of speed.
Guys, we're coming towards the end of our time here, so I wanted to do a quick lightning round before we actually go to our last question. So, and we're going to do first Pedro, then Julian, then Ryan. First question: what is one engineering metric that needs to die in 2025?
I mean, I guess I want to be super obvious. Lines of code, or yeah, like, yeah, lines of code. It's really obvious. But in reality, I think I was thinking about it, and I thought to myself, any one metric that's in isolation, right? Because that's a more politically correct answer.
Julian.
+1, but I'll also add just like time tracking for specific tasks. Like, I don't know if anyone does that outside of consulting, but that just feels like death by accounting.
Ryan?
Yeah, I'm a pacifist by nature, so you're asking me to kill something, which is difficult. But if I had to choose, I guess velocity and story points on a team level. As I mentioned earlier, like, I don't see them as being terribly relevant beyond a measure of how well we might be estimating, right? And they've never really been useful as a true measure of success. So if I had to pick, those are the two that I'd pick.
Second question, same order, Pedro, Julian, Ryan. If you could only track one metric for a team success, what would it be? Just one.
Just one. Quantitative metric?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess like that. Absolutely nobody hasn't tried Cursor or Windsor. Like, I am going as far as to say, like, I am like passing on candidates who have never tried those tools.
Julian?
Can you repeat the question? I think I misinterpreted it.
Yeah, if you could only track one metric for your team success,
Okay.
what metric would that be?
Mine's is very different than cursor adoption, but I totally appreciate that. It would be team KTLO burden. And so kind of like how much of the team's capacity is being kind of taken by things with an SLA that are impossible or difficult to anticipate. Because I think that not only can it make like quarter planning very difficult, but also because these things can come in as fast and urgent interruptions, it can really easily just lead to burnout. And I think that's terrible for teams.
Okay. Ryan?
Yeah, and if I had to pick just one bigger picture metric, I think I would go with time to value, which is like something I mentioned earlier. how quickly can we deliver something that provides tangible value to our customers? Of course, that's harder to track because it's not just an engineering metric. It relies on a lot of other teams performing well. But I think my piece of the pie would be lead time for changes. How quickly can we go from code commit to production? And if that number is improving, it means that we're reducing friction in development, testing, deployment, and that's ultimately going to help get value to customers faster.
Love that. All right, guys, and to wrap up, a couple of questions from the audience here. So we've got Amir Khan asking you guys, how do you identify someone trying to game the metrics? So we've referenced gaming the system, gaming the metrics a couple of times during this this chat. How do you guys actually identify that?
I think you have to, often you have to be looking at wherever the tool is where that gaming could or would be happening. If your GitHub is often the place, since we've talked a lot about number of PRs or lines of code change, I think, it's important for leadership to check in sometimes, or if you have hopefully an open channel of communication with the teams. And if you start seeing anti-patterns starting to drift in, all of a sudden there's every new word is on a new line, you probably have some incentives misaligned there.
And I'd go as far as to say it might be your problem as a manager if people are trying to gain the metrics. It's because you are rewarding them for gaining the metrics, and you have to take a hard look at yourself and how you're tracking engineering productivity, with those metrics in isolation, and maybe change your ways.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it comes down to the culture of your team, right? If you have a team with a good culture, where people aren't paranoid about metrics tracking, then I think you're going to find yourself in a position where you're not having to worry about that so much. And for us, we talked earlier about asynchronous is really key. But for us, our engineering team, we work really well synchronously as well, at least on a daily basis, just having those stand-ups to connect one-on-one with each other and see each other a little bit face-to-face. I think that kind of helps just to put a human face on the situation and make sure that we maintain a good team culture.
A strong, psychologically safe team, I think, is going to be much less likely to game metrics.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah, people respond to behaviors, right? Behaviors respond to incentives, right? That's what's behind that. All right, and the last question we've got here, and this is a really good one because it focuses on engineering leaders, which I guess is a significant part of our audience. If you could give engineering leaders one piece of advice on tracking performance in 2025, what advice would that be? Maybe we'll start with Ryan.
Sure. I fear that I'm going to sound a little bit like a broken record here, but I think focusing on outcomes rather than on output. Because in 2025, with AI handling more of the routine coding, I think it's more important than ever to measure impact over activity. So instead of tracking how much code gets written or how many tickets get closed, look at how the whole engineering organization is driving business value. So of course, improving time to value, as I keep talking about, reducing friction for customers, making the entire team more efficient. And good performance tracking should spark the right conversations, right? The best metrics help you to make better decisions, but they should never be the things that are making the decisions for you. So my advice would be measure what matters, but don't let the numbers run the show.
Pedro, what's your advice to engineering leaders who want to track performance in 2025?
I guess I would go on a more individual level, right? And because to complement Ryan's response, and I would look at what does the ideal engineer look like in 2025 and beyond, right? And I think to me, the ideal engineer, and the model of the engineer that I would love to have in my team is an engineer that first they use AI first approaches, right? They are an orchestrator of AI agent swarms, right? And that's nascent at this point, but in a year that's going to be reality. Just so they can think bigger picture, right? And I think the scope, again, the bar's higher, the scope's wider, and maybe a senior in 2026 might have the scope that a principal engineer would have in 2022. So I think it's really important to like really use these tools to level yourself up as an engineer, and also the kinds of people who are going to be successful are slightly different. I think I mean, craft is important, right? But craft without outcomes is just like a hobby, right? On the bar is higher, like you need to get out of your comfort zone if you're a senior. You need to be, I mean, juniors are more open, definitely, but you need to think up more about user need and less about your craft and crafting beautiful, great code. Think about user needs, business outcomes. You need to be team focused as well. They're saying, I think it was Andre Karpathy that said, like, English is the new programming language. And it is the one that your non-engineering teammates can compile to, right? So that's the kind of thing that you need to, like, those qualities are way more these days than others, than just pure mastery, just knowing all the ins and out of programming languages, SDKs, APIs, and you just know how to ask the right questions, really. Like, you know how to prompt, you know how to you can find the right questions to be answered, because these models, they have a lot of answers, but they don't know how to ask the questions yet, maybe.
Great point of view. Julian, what's your advice for engineering leaders?
I would say to keep the maturity of your product, of your team in mind as you're looking at all of the metrics and things that you want to be tracking. I think it's, we've have 3 leaders from very different size companies here, and and each company is going to have its own culture and its own different set of starting points, its own history, its own kind of pedigree from where the people have come from as well, which will influence how they generally operate. It can be very easy and very tempting to get over your skis when it comes to implementing any kind of metric. I think, you can instrument a product to the gills with all sorts of different things, but like, don't instrument more than you're realistically going to be reviewing, and be asking yourself, if one of these numbers goes sideways, how urgent is that going to be for us to fix? How fast are we going to respond to that? Or how much are we going to be reviewing it? Because if it's something where, if it goes sideways, we're not going to care, or it's not going to be a priority, then sure, you could do it aspirationally, but you're really probably just going to be adding tech debt to the product. Or if you're adding more process changes, realize that every bit of process that you add is probably going to be pulling people away from doing the work that you're paying them to do. And so just don't get high on your own supply with this stuff, and just be pragmatic as you go about it. But also obviously don't fly blind. What you measure will be what changes, and you do need to make sure that you are, if you do have things instrumented, you do need to be meeting regularly to check in on it. Don't let it just go dark.
All right. I love that. Guys, thank you so much for this discussion. I learned a ton, and it was just a great crew to chat with about this topic of team metrics that actually matter in 2025. We were joined by Ryan Cooley from ProcessMaker, Pedro Tabio from Vibrant, and Julian Ramirez from Dropbox. Thanks everyone for attending this webinar as well. Everyone's going to be getting the recording from this discussion, and we'll also be sending out a survey about the webinar and about topics that you'd like to hear about in the future and future webinars. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.